I stood there in complete shock as security guards grabbed my arms, while Rosewood's most prestigious jewelry store owner screamed that people like me had no business touching million-dollar pieces. She had no idea that the simple silver band on my finger was actually worth $50 million, or that I was about to become the owner of her entire establishment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now let me tell you exactly what happened that day in the heart of Pinnacle City's Diamond District. My name is Celeste, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be walking around with one of the world's most valuable rings disguised as costume jewelry, I would have thought they were completely insane. But life has this incredible way of taking you on journeys you never expected. You see, I inherited this ring from my grandmother, Evelyn Thornfield, who was one of the most successful gem collectors in history. She built an empire buying and selling rare stones across 6 continents. But she lived so quietly that most people assumed she was just an eccentric old woman who collected pretty rocks. When she passed away 3 years ago, she left me everything. Her entire collection, her investment portfolio, her real estate holdings, and most importantly, her philosophy about wealth. True luxury, she always told me, isn't about showing off what you have. It's about having the freedom to be exactly who you are without needing anyone's approval. That's why I chose to live simply in my modest apartment in Riverside Heights, working as a freelance art appraiser. I loved the work, and it kept me connected to beautiful things without the pretentious world that often surrounded them. The only piece of grandmother's collection I wore regularly was this ring, a flawless 15-carat pink diamond surrounded by rare blue diamonds, set in platinum that was over a century old. To most people, it looked like nothing special. The setting was antique and understated, the kind of thing you might find at a vintage shop for $50. I'd had it specially treated with a coating that made the diamonds appear to be simple glass stones. It was the perfect disguise. I could wear my grandmother's most precious piece without attracting unwanted attention or questions about my background. For 3 years, this system worked perfectly. I lived my quiet life, appraised art for galleries and private collectors, and enjoyed the freedom that came with hidden wealth. I didn't need to impress anyone or prove anything to the world. I was content being invisible in a city full of people desperately trying to be seen. But last Thursday, everything changed because of a single phone call that would lead me into the most humiliating and ultimately satisfying experience of my life. I was working on an appraisal for a small gallery in Meridian Square when my phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Jameson Clearwater, representing the estate of a recently deceased collector. He explained that they had several pieces they needed authenticated and valued quickly, and my name had come highly recommended in the art appraisal community. "There's just one catch," he said, his voice slightly apologetic. "The pieces are currently being held at Gilded Crown Jewelers for insurance purposes. The owner, Anastasia Blackthorne, is handling the security arrangements, and she's insisted that any appraiser examine the pieces on her premises." I knew Gilded Crown by reputation. It was the most exclusive jewelry store in Pinnacle City, located in the prestigious Aurora district where celebrities and billionaires did their shopping. I'd never had reason to go there before, but I figured it would be a straightforward professional visit. "She's expecting you this Thursday at 2 p.m., Jameson continued. "Just ask for Mrs. Blackthorne when you arrive. She'll have everything prepared for your examination." I should have realized something was off when I arrived at Gilded Crown that Thursday afternoon. The store was absolutely stunning. Floor-to-ceiling display cases filled with diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, emeralds the size of small eggs, and gold pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was bathed in soft, expensive lighting that made even the smallest gems sparkle like magic. But the moment I walked through the door, I felt the weight of judgment settling on my shoulders. I was wearing my usual work outfit: dark jeans, a simple white blouse, and comfortable flats. My hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and my only jewelry was grandmother's ring and small silver earrings I'd owned for years. The sales associates behind the gleaming counters looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They took one look at me and immediately exchanged glances that clearly said, "What is she doing here?" I approached the nearest associate, a tall woman with platinum blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo. Her name tag read Victoria. and she was wearing a burgundy dress that screamed expensive designer. "Excuse me," I said politely. "I have an appointment with Mrs. Blackthorne at 2 p.m. I'm Celeste Whitmore, the art appraiser." Victoria looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rising in obvious disbelief. "An appraiser?" she repeated, as if I'd claimed to be a space alien. "Are you sure you have the right place? This is Gilded Crown Jewelers, not some community center." I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady. "Yes, I'm quite sure. Jameson Clearwater arranged the appointment. I'm here to examine some estate pieces." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Victoria's expression shifted from dismissive to suspicious. She clearly couldn't reconcile my appearance with the high-end nature of the work I was claiming to do. After a long moment, she gestured vaguely toward the back of the store. "Wait here," she said curtly. "I'll see if Mrs. Blackthorne is available." As I stood there waiting, I couldn't help but admire the incredible craftsmanship surrounding me. Each piece in the displays was a work of art, representing countless hours of skilled labor and generations of expertise. I found myself drawn to a particularly stunning necklace featuring a cascade of yellow diamonds that seemed to glow with their own inner light. That's when I first encountered Anastasia Blackthorne herself and realized that this was going to be much more complicated than a simple professional appointment. Anastasia Blackthorne emerged from the back office like she was making a grand entrance at a royal ball. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone who owned Pinnacle City's most exclusive jewelry store. Tall, elegant, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon and sharp cheekbones that could cut crystal. She wore a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her jewelry was a carefully curated display of power: diamond tennis bracelet, emerald earrings the size of grapes, and a necklace that caught the light with every breath she took. But it was her eyes that immediately put me on edge. Cold, calculating gray eyes that seemed to appraise everything they looked at, including me, and find it lacking. "You must be the appraiser," she said, drawing out the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Her voice had that particular brand of sophistication that came from years of looking down on people she considered beneath her station. "Yes, I'm Celeste Whitmore," I replied, extending my hand professionally. "Thank you for accommodating this appointment, Mrs. Blackthorne." She looked at my outstretched hand for a long moment before giving it the briefest possible shake, as if prolonged contact might somehow contaminate her perfectly manicured fingers. I must admit, when Jameson mentioned sending an appraiser, I expected someone more established. Someone with proper credentials and professional appearance. The insult was delivered with a smile, but there was no mistaking the venom behind it. Around us, the other customers and staff members were starting to take notice of our conversation. I could see phones subtly appearing as people sensed drama brewing in this usually serene temple of luxury. "I assure you my credentials are excellent," I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "I've been appraising fine art and jewelry for over 8 years. I have certifications from the American Society of Appraisers and have worked with estates worth millions of dollars." Anastasia's laugh was like crystal breaking, sharp, cold, and somehow dangerous. "Oh, I'm sure you have, dear. I'm sure you've handled all sorts of interesting pieces. But you see, Gilded Crown caters to a very specific clientele. We're talking about items worth more than some people's houses. Items that require a certain level of expertise and, frankly, sophistication to properly evaluate." She gestured around the store with obvious pride, and I had to admit it was breathtaking. The displays were works of art themselves, each piece positioned to catch the light at the perfect angle. I could see tiaras that looked like they belonged on European royalty, watches that cost more than luxury cars, and engagement rings that sparkled like captured starlight. "Perhaps," Anastasia continued, her voice growing louder as she clearly began to enjoy having an audience, "it would be better if you referred this job to someone more appropriate, someone who understands the gravity of handling truly exceptional pieces." I glanced around the store and realized we now had quite an audience. Other customers had stopped their browsing to watch our exchange, and several staff members had positioned themselves where they could observe while pretending to organize inventory. I could see phones recording, people whispering behind their hands, and that familiar look of anticipation that comes when people sense they're about to witness a public humiliation. "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said, trying one more time to keep things professional. "I understand your concerns about security and proper handling. I'm happy to provide references from previous clients or additional documentation of my qualifications, but I was specifically requested for this job, and I'm prepared to complete it to everyone's satisfaction." That's when her mask of politeness finally slipped completely. "Requested by whom?" she snapped. "Some discount estate sale company? Some family desperate to liquidate grandmother's costume jewelry collection?" The crowd around us was growing, and I could see the gleam in Anastasia's eyes as she realized she had their full attention. This wasn't just about my qualifications anymore. This was about her asserting her dominance in her own territory, putting an outsider in their place for the entertainment of her wealthy clientele. "Look around you," she said, spreading her arms wide to encompass the glittering displays. "This is Gilded Crown Jewelers. We house pieces worth millions." Just last week, I sold a necklace that belonged to a Russian princess for $12 million. Yesterday, a tech billionaire's wife purchased earrings worth more than most people will make in their entire lifetime. She walked over to one of the central display cases and pointed to a massive diamond ring that seemed to generate its own light. "This engagement ring is worth $2 million. The diamond is flawless, internally perfect, and has a provenance that traces back to the crown jewels of France." The crowd was eating it up. I could see people pulling out their phones, some to record the drama and others to Google the pieces she was mentioning. Whispered conversations filled the air as customers shared their own stories of expensive purchases and exclusive encounters. "The problem," Anastasia announced to her captive audience, turning back to face me with theatrical precision, "is that sometimes people don't understand the level of sophistication required to appreciate true luxury. They see something sparkly and think they understand value, but they have no concept of what they're actually looking at." She walked back toward me, and I noticed that her staff had subtly positioned themselves around the store in a way that blocked the exits. Victoria, the platinum blonde who'd first questioned my presence, was now standing near the front door with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on her face. "For instance," Anastasia continued, her voice dripping with condescension as she looked pointedly at my simple outfit, "someone might walk in here wearing what they think is jewelry, completely unaware that they're insulting everyone around them with obvious fakes and costume pieces." My stomach dropped as I realized where this was heading. Her cold, gray eyes had focused on my hands, specifically on my grandmother's ring. From her perspective, I was sure it looked exactly like what she was describing. A cheap imitation that someone with no taste might wear to try to fit in. "That ring, for example," she said, pointing directly at my hand with obvious disgust. "I've seen better craftsmanship in airport gift shops. The diamonds are clearly cubic zirconia, probably not worth more than $20 retail. And the setting," she actually shuddered, "it looks like something from a costume jewelry bin at a discount store." The crowd pressed closer, everyone straining to get a look at the ring that had become the center of attention. I could hear murmurs of agreement from some of Anastasia's regular customers, people who were probably grateful to have someone else become the target of her disdain. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Anastasia declared, her voice rising to ensure everyone in the store could hear her clearly. "People who don't understand the difference between real luxury and cheap imitation. People who think they can fool others by wearing obvious fakes to places like this." I looked around at all the faces staring at me, some shocked, some entertained, others clearly uncomfortable with the public shaming they were witnessing. My cheeks were burning with embarrassment, but something deep inside me refused to back down. "Actually," I said quietly, "this ring has been in my family for generations. It has significant sentimental value, regardless of its monetary worth." Anastasia's laugh was even crueler than before. "Sentimental value? Oh, that's precious. Let me guess. It belonged to your grandmother who told you it was worth a fortune. That's the oldest story in the book, dear. Every family has some piece of valuable jewelry that turns out to be worthless costume pieces when properly appraised." She turned to address her audience again, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. This is exactly why professional authentication is so important. People inherit pieces and create entire fantasy stories about their value based on family legends and wishful thinking. The humiliation was overwhelming, but I found myself thinking about my grandmother's words about true luxury being the freedom to be exactly who you are. She would have handled this situation with grace and dignity, regardless of what anyone thought about her appearance or her jewelry. You're absolutely right about the importance of professional authentication, I said, my voice growing stronger. Perhaps we should focus on the estate pieces I was called here to examine. But Anastasia wasn't finished with her public demonstration yet. She had found the perfect target for her cruelty, and she was going to milk every moment of it for her audience's entertainment. You know what? Anastasia announced, her voice filled with vindictive satisfaction as she surveyed her captive audience. I think this is actually a perfect teaching moment for everyone here today, a demonstration of why expertise and proper evaluation matter in the luxury jewelry world. She walked over to a glass display case and retrieved a small device that looked like a high-tech magnifying glass. This is a professional gemological loupe, worth more than some people's monthly salary. It can identify the difference between real diamonds and cheap imitations instantly. The crowd pressed closer, phones held high to capture what was clearly about to become the evening's entertainment. I could see the excitement in their eyes. They were about to witness someone being publicly exposed as a fraud, and they didn't want to miss a second of it. Now, Anastasia continued, holding the loupe up dramatically, let's settle this little question about family heirlooms and sentimental value. Because I guarantee you, when we examine this, quote, precious family ring under proper magnification, we're going to see exactly what I suspected from the moment she walked in here. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the store could hear it. Part of me wanted to just remove the ring and leave, to escape this public humiliation before it went any further. But another part of me, the part that remembered my grandmother's strength and dignity, refused to be intimidated. I'd be happy to have the ring examined, I said quietly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. But I should mention that it's been treated with a special coating to protect it, so the surface appearance might be misleading. Anastasia paused for just a moment, and I saw the faintest flicker of uncertainty cross her face. But she was too committed to her performance now, and the crowd was too invested in seeing the drama play out. A special coating, she repeated mockingly. How convenient. Let me guess. This magical coating makes cubic zirconia look exactly like real diamonds under examination? Is that what your grandmother told you when she gave you this priceless heirloom? The laughter from her supporters in the crowd was like knives cutting through my composure. I could see Victoria near the door actually recording with her phone, probably planning to post the video on social media with some cruel caption about people who don't know their place. Actually, came a quiet voice from the back of the store, I'd be very interested to see that examination myself. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. An elderly man had emerged from behind one of the larger display cases, someone I hadn't noticed before in all the commotion. He was impeccably dressed in a navy suit that screamed understated wealth, with silver hair and kind but sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. And you are? Anastasia demanded, clearly annoyed by this interruption to her show. Professor Edmund Rothwell, he said calmly, approaching our group with unhurried steps. Gemological Institute of America. I was in the back examining some pieces for authentication when I heard the discussion about professional evaluation. I felt my breath catch. The Gemological Institute of America was the most prestigious organization in the jewelry world. If this man was who he claimed to be, his word would carry more weight than anyone else's in the room. Anastasia's confident smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. Well, Professor, you're about to witness a perfect example of why proper education is so important in our field. This young woman has been insisting that her obviously fake ring is some kind of valuable family heirloom. Professor Rothwell nodded thoughtfully, his eyes moving to my hand with genuine interest rather than judgment. May I? He asked politely, gesturing toward the ring. I hesitated for just a moment, knowing that whatever happened next would determine how this entire nightmare ended. Then I slowly removed the ring and placed it in his outstretched palm. The store fell completely silent as Professor Rothwell examined the ring with practiced ease, turning it over in his hands and holding it up to the light. His expression remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own loupe. a device that looked far more sophisticated than the one Anastasia had been brandishing. The crowd held its collective breath as he bent over the ring, examining it with the kind of intense focus that comes from decades of expertise. After what felt like an eternity, Professor Rothwell straightened up, but his expression was unreadable. He looked at me, then at Anastasia, then back at the ring in his hand. "This is quite remarkable," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silent store. "Anastasia, you mentioned this appears to be cubic zirconia and costume jewelry?" "Obviously," she replied, though I noticed her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Anyone with basic training can see that it's a cheap imitation. The clarity is all wrong, the cut is amateur work, and the setting looks like something from a discount bin." Professor Rothwell nodded slowly. "I can understand why you might think that at first glance. The coating the young lady mentioned does indeed obscure the true nature of the stones, but underneath—" He paused, looking around the room at all the expectant faces. "Underneath, this is one of the most extraordinary pieces I've ever had the privilege to examine." Anastasia's face went white. "What do you mean?" "The center stone," Professor Rothwell continued, his voice growing stronger as he warmed to his subject, "is a 15-carat fancy vivid pink diamond of internally flawless clarity. The surrounding stones are natural blue diamonds, each one perfectly matched and of exceptional quality. The platinum setting appears to be early 20th century, possibly Cartier based on the craftsmanship details." The silence in the store was so complete that I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. People were staring at Professor Rothwell like he was speaking a foreign language, their phones forgotten in their hands as they tried to process what they'd just heard. "That's impossible," Anastasia whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. Professor Rothwell smiled kindly. "I understand your surprise. Pieces like this are extraordinarily rare. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this particular ring matches the description of the famous Thornfield pink, which disappeared from public view about 30 years ago after being sold at auction for—" He paused, as if calculating. "I believe it was $18 million at the time. Adjusted for current market values and the continued appreciation of fancy-colored diamonds, I would estimate this piece to be worth approximately $50 million today." The sound that went up from the crowd was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Gasps, exclamations, and the immediate clicking of phones as everyone tried to capture this moment. People were frantically Googling Thornfield pink and $50 million ring, their faces cycling through disbelief, shock, and something approaching awe, but it was Anastasia's face that I couldn't look away from. All the color had drained from her cheeks, and she was staring at the ring in Professor Rothwell's hands like it might bite her. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. "You said this belonged to your grandmother?" Professor Rothwell asked me gently, his tone completely different from the condescending voices I'd been hearing all afternoon. "Yes," I managed to say, my own voice shaky with the enormity of what was happening. "Evelyn Thornfield. She was a gem collector." "Evelyn Thornfield," he repeated, and his eyes lit up with recognition. "Of course. She was legendary in our field, one of the most knowledgeable collectors of the 20th century. She had an incredible eye for exceptional stones and was known for her discretion. Many of her pieces were never publicly catalogued." He handed the ring back to me with the kind of reverence usually reserved for handling religious artifacts. "You've been wearing one of the world's most valuable pieces of jewelry like it was costume jewelry. Your grandmother was clearly a woman who understood that true luxury doesn't need to announce itself to the world." As I slipped the ring back onto my finger, I looked around at the faces surrounding me. The same people who had been enjoying my humiliation just minutes before were now staring at me with a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and newfound respect. Phones that had been recording my shame were now capturing my triumph. And Anastasia Blackthorne, who had spent the last hour treating me like I was beneath her notice, was standing frozen in the middle of her own store, realizing that she had just publicly humiliated someone who was wearing jewelry worth more than her entire inventory. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely and so suddenly that the very air seemed to vibrate with tension. and I was just beginning to understand the full implications of what had just been revealed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.